My name is Randy. I'm alcoholic.
Hey, Randy.
I had the opportunity of meeting this gentleman some years ago. We were on a street called 8 Mile. You guys know 8 Mile. And he came over to the local unexpectedly. I had never met him before, never heard of him. He was with a gentleman named Tim. And I was sitting there, and then I think after the meeting, I had known Tim before. He introduced me to Joe. And now indicated that Joe needed help. He needed like a sponsor. I do temporary sponsorship. And then after that, I generally turn him over to someone who can work with them on a deeper level. Oh, by the way, this is my 41st year of sobriety. So I wanted to give, I'll be brief, but I wanted to give back to AA what AA has given me. And that is direction, focus, and new hope. So I took Joe under my wings, taught him the way that the old timers taught me, working through the steps, working through the tradition, and also self-examination. Well, I'm here to report that since that day, Joe has not drank. He might be a little crazy.
A little.
And I'm being kind. But our primary purpose is to stay sober and help another alcoholic to achieve sobriety. So I introduce to some, present to others, my best friend, Joe Z. Come on up here. She's all yours.
Wow. My name is Joe. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Joe.
Wow. We had like 50 people in here, plus some really, really important people to me online. My parents are watching, my sister's watching, my friend in Hawaii is watching, California, Florida. Really, this is really important to me. I'm not good at speeches at all, so I make a few little notes, but my eyes are so bad I'm probably not going to watch.
I know your story.
They said I had to talk for an hour, but you guys already got 15 minutes out of the way, so I could shrink it a little bit. My story, I'm going to say it's been a road, and I've got a lot of bumps ahead of me and a lot of bumps behind me, and I'm still in some turbulence. My life has been a roller coaster. I started out, I'll just give you a brief background of my early years. My parents were both school teachers. They're both very, very good people. I didn't come from a bad family at all. I didn't come from a family of alcoholics or drug addicts or abandonment or abuse. I came from two very loving parents in the suburbs in Sterling Heights. I looked like a picture-perfect yellow house on the corner of Lancaster and Mark Drive in 15 and Ryan. For whatever reason, I grew up in a neighborhood where there was a lot of, it was kind of like a melting pot for Metro Detroit of every different ethnicity there is in that 1 square mile. And I think by the time I was 6 years old, I felt that I didn't fit in. There was, all of my neighbors, I think I was the only American kid within 10 houses. At least at that point when I was growing up. When my sister was growing up, it was, when she went away to the Army, that's when everybody else started moving in. And I just didn't feel like I fit in. And my parents were great people, but they were also very busy. So after work, my dad was correcting papers usually until 8 o'clock at night. My mom was involved in her pottery class or her art class or, being on a board of, the elementary school or whatever else it may be. And so my surroundings were the neighborhood kids. And the neighborhood kids were people that came from all different ethnicities. I don't think anyone felt like they fit in because we were all so different. And I think we all tried to outdo each other to see who was like the wildest or the craziest or the most daring or whatever it may be. And I think by the time I was 7 or 8 years old, I started shoplifting. And I started getting in trouble. The first time I got suspended from school was in 1st grade. I got suspended again in 3rd grade. And in 5th grade, I got suspended 3 times. And I almost got expelled in 6th grade. My parents are both school teachers, and they got me in a private school that only had 35 kids in the school, but I still demanded all the attention. And then when I got back from that private school back to the neighborhood, I demanded all the attention. And I wanted to be the one that everyone says, man, he's crazy, man. Like, I wanted to be that kid. And my parents were kind of in their own thing. My sister went away to the Army, and that hurt me a lot because she was like my big, I looked up to my sister. She protected me. And she was in trouble sometimes, and I think mostly with my parents. But when she was 18, she went away to the Army, and that kind of put me in a little bit of a spin. And I think over the time of my early teenage years, I started stealing a lot more. I started getting in trouble with the law. The first time I was arrested, I was 11 years old. At one point, I counted my arrests, and I think I was arrested 27 times before the time I was 25. Eventually got shipped off to, I lived at 380 North Rose Road in Mount Clemens, which was the Macomb County Youth Home, several times during my adolescence. I got shipped off to 2 boarding schools. The first boarding school was up in Leelanau, and they had a bridge that we were walking over during the interview, and the lady was chuckling, and she says, "Oh, this is a funny bridge," and my parents were saying, "Why?" And she says, "Well, every year the new kid gets thrown over into the water by one of the seniors." And I said, "Like this?" And I picked her up and I threw her over into the and it was a bridge that's 10 feet down. There's a little river, and that was the end of that interview. So I got shipped back off to juvie, and 3 weeks later, they found this residential boarding school in Massachusetts that Oprah was, really heavily influencing or pushing. And so we go out to Massachusetts. I'm like, okay, I'll get kicked out of this one too. And the place looked nice, but I didn't know anybody there. All my friends were in juvie or else in the neighborhood. And so when I got there, I get to this interview, and I light up a cigarette, being this little badass 16-year-old. And I was facing 2 years in juvie or else 11 months in the youth home or 11 months in boarding school, and I still wanted to do the 2 years in juvie instead because it was familiar to me. Anyways, I couldn't get kicked out of that place to save my life. I did everything I possibly could to get kicked out. And I remember the day that I lost, my first time that I ever felt powerless was watching my parents' taillights go away into the snow, into the Berkshire Mountain area where I'm stuck in this boarding school away from everything. There's no civilization for miles and miles except for this school. And in this school I acted out. I broke out twice. My 11 months got extended. I wound up staying for 3.5 years. I got out when I was 19.5 years old. But during my time in that school, they had, if you acted out, life was hell. If you followed the program, life got easy. And so, after a few bumps in the road, I figured out that if I follow the program, I can play sports. If I follow the program, I can eat in the dining room and eat normal food instead of rice cakes. If I follow the program, I can talk to girls. I don't have to be just in the old boys, new boys dorm. One of the things they offered, the headmaster of the school, his name was Michael DeSisto. When I was in that initial interview, he was over 450 pounds. And about 2 years into my stay there, he got into a program called Overeaters Anonymous, which is another 12-step based program. And he got down to like 160 pounds in a year, and it changed his life. And he kind of spewed that 12-step all over the school. And he allowed us to go to 12-step meetings to stay out of doing work crews, the different things that we had to do. So I went just so that way I could get out of doing things. I wasn't an alcoholic. I didn't do drugs at that point. I was a thief, and I was rebellious. But so I went to these meetings, and I watched people talk about their recovery. And I was rolling my eyes half the time, like, these guys are a bunch of losers. They're crazy, whatever. I'm not going to be like that when I grow up. But that was my foundation. That was the first introduction I had to any type of AA or NA or SLA or CODA or OA or all the different meetings that they allowed us to go to. And then I eventually got out of boarding school. And when I got out of boarding school, it was just like our disease. When we pick back up, it picks up exactly where we left off. I had 4 years and 3.5 years in this boarding school, of which the last year and a half I was appropriate. I was doing I was responsible. I was doing all these great things. And I get out of boarding school and I'm stealing car radios again at 19 years old. I didn't get in trouble. I was a fast runner. I got away. I challenged the police. I remember when I moved back to Michigan, I went to Service Merchandise over here that used to be behind this building, and they had these car radios inside the wall, and you press this button to listen to this radio, and press this button to listen on these speakers. And I saw the security guard looking at me. I ripped it out of the wall, and I just smiled at him. And I football dashed it through made him chase me, and I got away. It was like a challenge. It was a thrill to get away with things. And that's who I was. When I look back at my life now, it's such a, I don't even recognize that person. I can't even, the only reason I know it exists is because I was there. Because I would never believe any of the stories that I would tell about myself. All the scams I used to pull, all the thievery I used to do, the people I screwed over, how heartless I was in certain situations. I just look at that part of my life as like I was like a whole different person, and I don't even recognize that person. Anyways, fast forward a little bit. I was still very rebellious. My parents didn't have a relationship with me when I got out of boarding school. In fact, I wound up in the hospital with pneumonia, and the nurse called my mom. I was 19, and she says, "Is he gonna die?" She says, No, he'll be fine. Is he gonna stay there overnight? Yeah, he'll be out tomorrow. Well, good. If he wants to have a relationship with us, tell him to go and graduate and get back to school. She was doing the tough love thing with me. When I was 19 and a half, I was no longer court mandated. I walked instead of staying there the extra year to graduate. So I wound up getting a GED, called it a good enough diploma. And anyways, I continue to get do a lot of things that, getting in trouble and what have you. And then when I moved back to Michigan, I was living in my aunt's basement, and I got a job at Chi-Chi's restaurant. And then I lost that job because I was flirting with one of the waitresses, and I was the host, and I was, obviously doing something I shouldn't have been doing on the job, sexually harassing this woman, that worked with me. And I was just crazy. I was absolutely nuts. And I started just going job to job, and finally I got this job. My aunt gave me an ultimatum that if I don't have a job by the end of the day, that I can't live in her basement anymore. And so I circled 2 ads in the paper. One was Jack's Car Wash on Telegraph, and I figured I can steal a few dollars because it's all cash. I can get free car washes and probably meet a lot of pretty girls. And the other one was selling Kirby vacuum cleaners door to door, but it didn't say that in the ad. It said shampooing carpets for $400 a week. So I went to Jack's. They were full, so I had to take the Kirby job. And I was like, oh crap, I'm not a salesperson. I am now. I'm not a salesperson, And I take this job, and everyone in my family that did speak to me said, you can't make money selling vacuum cleaners. And I was gonna quit because it sucked going door to door with this 26-pound vacuum cleaner under your arm and trying to talk some, lady into let me show her vacuum cleaner when her husband's at work and they have a vacuum cleaner in their closet that works and it's 100 degrees out. I'm in a tie and dress shoes. No fun. Everyone that told me I couldn't do it and there's no money in it is why I stayed with it, because I didn't want them to say I told you so. And it was the same rebellious behavior that I had, the same rebellious attitude that I had growing up. Anyways, I stuck with it, and I stuck with it only because of wanting to be defiant. And during the time I met Tim. Tim Clark is my sponsor in AA. And Tim was a good-looking guy. I was 20, he was 30. He was a good-looking guy, had all the ladies always following him. I mean, he always, drove the fancy stuff. He always had shiny jewelry on, and, he was muscular, and all the girls liked him, and he was tan, and, so if I hung around Tim, I'd get the girls that, and so I felt cool hanging around Tim, and I always looked up to Tim. But Tim had a problem, and Tim did a lot of drugs, and Tim was very dynamic. He was very, very good at what he did, but he was also very, very, as extreme as he was this way, he was extreme as he was that way. And I remember being on a cruise with Tim, and Tim went off, and we didn't see Tim for a long time, and I didn't know how powerful drug addiction at that time could be. I had no idea. I knew alcohol somewhat, and I remember Tim was he was gone for a little while, and my friend Larry, that also worked for the company, we decided we were going to try to find him, and we couldn't reach him, and we broke into his apartment, and sure enough, we found him laying on a beanbag, passed out with a couple girls next to him or whatever, and he was okay, he was alive, but he was high out of his mind, and I had some experience with 12-step things. I said, we got to get this guy to a meeting. Here I'm drunk half the time, but we got to get this guy to a meeting. And Tim got into the program, and then Tim fell out, and Tim got back in, and then Tim stayed in. My story for the next 20 years was completely different, because I would get in trouble, and I would get into AA, because my trouble at that point, after I stopped stealing and stopped being a total jerk in my life when I was, in my early to mid 20s, I still drank, and I drank progressively more and more because I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be the bar star. I wanted to hang out and be the coolest guy in the club. I wanted to feel important by, being the host at the nightclub and letting all the girls in the VIP. And next thing you know, I'm dating girls that are way out of my league just because of the position I had in the nightclubs. And so, over the years, I was drinking more and more and more, and I wound up getting my first DUI. It slapped the hell out of me. I wasn't able to drive. I wasn't able to do a lot of things. I was on probation again, and I haven't been on probation at that point for years, and I felt like I was going back in time and really messing my life up. I remember making these magnets that said, "Been drinking, free sober ride home, don't risk it." And I slapped them on the side of my car, and I went to the nightclub because I could still pick up girls. That's what I wanted to do. And I was the sober, the smart guy in the bar, whatever. That's where I was thinking. Once I was off probation, I did what everyone else did, is try to drink responsibly again. I'll just have 2. I'll just drink on the weekends. As long as I have water in between, I can last longer. All these things that I try to tell myself. And I managed to escape the law for a lot of years. I would still drink and drive. I would just drive between 2 of my friends or something. We try to always outsmart it. And eventually I got in trouble again. I got a second DUI. And that second DUI came shortly after the first one, so my license was revoked. When my license got revoked, I initially hired a driver to drive me around to my appointments. At this point, I was working for a carpet company selling carpet and flooring. And I was making great money as a salesperson. When anytime this person that was my driver couldn't make it because she was hungover herself, I'd drive myself illegally. And I remember there was one day that I was going to cash my check, and I was working in Arizona at this time. I was there for 2.5 years. And I remember making an illegal turn into the Price Chopper grocery store where I was going to cash my check. And when I made the turn, I saw a police officer do a U-turn. And I knew I had no license. And I'm driving a car, and I like, ugh, And so I sped up through this parking lot, almost hit somebody, took off through the back of the parking lot, and the cop never saw me. And I was like, man, I'm going to go to jail. Here I am, 34 years old at this point, running from the cops again, like I was when I was a rotten teenager. I eventually decided I was going to move back to Michigan. The company I worked for before Empire Today, I worked there for a few years, and then when I left there, I went to Express in Arizona. They tried to recruit me back. I went for an interview. They said they would hire a driver. I was a good salesperson at that point, so they were willing to invest in me. I got home that night, and I my buddy's house, at least that was my home. I was squatting in his basement, and I said, I don't want to go work for them. I remember why I left, and that's when I had the idea of starting my own business. I hid my car from the repo guy for about 18 months, and I was driving illegally still until they repoed my car. We were throwing after-hours parties in this basement of this house that we were living in. We charged $10 a head for people to get in. We'd spend $400 on liquor. We'd have 100 people in there. We'd have a $600 profit, and that's how I made it through the week, by having after-hours nightclub parties in the basement of this house in St. Clair Shores that we were living in. It was in foreclosure, mind you. Luckily, the sheriffs didn't come around in 6 months to lock you out. It took them a little longer because there were so many foreclosures in 2008 and 2009. Eventually, they kicked us out of there. But I remember I was on a house arrest tether. It was part of my probation for that DUI that I had in Arizona that I was able to manipulate my way out of and get the probation moved over to Michigan. And the house arrest tether didn't test me for alcohol, it just tested me for my location. I had to stay in this house from 9 o'clock at night until 7 o'clock in the morning. And so here we are the day before Super Bowl having this big after hours party. It's 1 o'clock in the morning or so. And I used to smoke cigarettes back then, and I ran out of smokes. And I was asking everybody, hey, can you go to 7-Eleven? It's a mile up the street. Here's $20. You keep the change. I just need a pack of smokes. And nobody would go. And I was like, why won't you go? It's a mile away. And they say, see that thing on your ankle? I don't want one of those. And they were talking sense. My crazy logical thinking at the time was like, it's a mile away. You're not going to get caught. And I remember being so mad that nobody would go to this store to buy me a pack of cigarettes that I ripped the tether off my ankle, threw it on the table. They're like, dude, you're crazy. And I remember nobody would give me their keys, and there was some girl that was passed out on the floor drunk, and I went through her purse, and I found her car keys, and I started walking down the street, hitting the little alarm button until I saw some lights blinking on a Jeep. I hopped in the Jeep, drove to 7-Eleven, got a pack of cigarettes, stole a sub. So I shoplifted a sub because it was $4. It's not worth it, so I'll just steal it. I was drunk. I was out of my mind. And I'm driving back to this house in St. Clair Shores, and in the rear view mirror, I see a car flying up behind me. And I'm like, oh no, is that a cop? And then as I'm looking in the mirror, I hit the curb. And now, oh man, that's it, I'm going to jail. And the car goes around me, it wasn't a cop. I get back to the house, I put the keys back in this girl's purse, I call house arrest services, say the thing broke off in my sleep. They said, you gotta come in and test. I said, I don't have a ride. They told me I have until noon to get in and blow, otherwise I'm gonna be violated. I drink a ton of water, my friend gets me ready, clear, I'm doing push-ups, I'm doing jumping jacks, trying to get, and I got all zeros when I got there at 11:50. Now it's Super Bowl Sunday. We have another party. This party's starting at 3 o'clock. All I kept thinking about that day was, if that was a cop last night, what would I be doing? right now, where would I be if that actually was a cop? I'd be in Macomb County Jail, facing felony DUI, in a stolen car, going to prison most likely for 2 to 5 years. I'd be on my knees, God, please get me through this. I promise, this last time, I promise. If you just get me through this, I'll never, ever do it again. I promise. That's what I'd be doing. And so I stayed sober that night. By 8 o'clock, when everyone's wasted, they're all hugging me. Joel, man, you're the best, man. Thanks for this party. Slobbering on me, repeating themselves, yelling in my ear. I'm just getting annoyed. I'm like, is this how I am when I'm drunk? Like, these kids are nuts. And I remember thinking that. Anyways, that's when I decided that my life had to change. I was 35 years old, more out of control than I was 20 years earlier when I was 15 years old in and out of juvie. Here I am, 35 years old. Now, the guy that I drugged to an NA meeting, to save his life, he's pushing 20 years sober, and here I am on day one all over again. And it really kind of put things in perspective, that I wasted that much time. I was homeless, I was carless, I was unemployable, I was squatting in my buddy's basement throwing after-hours party at 35 years old. If that's not out of control, I don't know what is. I was so checked out, I didn't know I was checked out. I got into AA. I asked Tim to be my sponsor. Tim helped guide me through some of the steps, especially the first couple steps, got me sober, started going to meetings. I started my business because I was still on house arrest, so I figured I had to figure something out productive. I started my business, the carpet guys. I started in that foreclosed house. And I started going door to door during the day, and that's how I started making money selling carpet. I started making money to the point where I was doing really well. I could hire someone to drive me around. I could hire a salesperson. I could hire an installer. I can make money from a desk. I'm patting myself on the back because now I'm more financially free than I've ever been, and I don't even have a license. So along with this change, my confidence started to grow. With my confidence growing, my ego was starting to do push-ups and really, really get big. After about 3 years, I stopped going to meetings. I don't need those things anymore. I don't feel the need to drink. And that's what I did. And for about a year, even though in my mind I was completely restless, irritable, and discontent at every level possible, I was just managing to stay away from alcohol or not pick up. I'd still hang around the drunks, I just wouldn't pick up. And eventually I picked up. And eventually when I picked up, I realized that I screwed up. I had a whole head full of AA. I was beating myself. I hated myself. But then I said, as long as I don't have more than 1 or 2, I'll be okay. And I try to drink like a gentleman again, even though I know 100% that's the most insane thing to think, because track record shows over and over and over again, no matter how many angles I try this at, I'm going to wind up in the same spot. I'm going to be in jail or dead or crazy, which I'm already crazy to even think that. Some time went by. I was trying to drink like a gentleman. And then I was in Miami one day, and I was with people that supply my company with materials. They've never been to Miami. I used to throw nightclubs, and they would throw parties at the nightclubs. So I knew everybody at Space. I knew everybody at Crowbar. I knew everybody at these places. I'll show you guys a good time. We started at Dirty Deuce, and I got kicked out of the Clevelander at 4 o'clock in the morning for taking a bottle off someone's thing after they cut me off. I gave him my rental car keys earlier that night. He had to catch, my friend Denny had to catch a plane. He says, don't drive. I said, I won't. He goes, you swear to God? I swear to God. Now this time I'm a dad. My son's at home, he's 1 year old. My son's mom and I are together. I'm at a nightclub drunk out of my mind. And I start walking up the street. I couldn't, my phone was dead. I couldn't get a cab on the phone, so I walk over to Washington. Crowbar's getting out. It's another nightclub in South Beach. And there's this really pretty girl that comes out, and she's stumbling out. I'm stumbling over here. Next thing you know, I'm kissing this girl. I'm cheating on my son's mom. Trying to make out with this girl that we don't even know each other. We get into my car, my rental car, go back to my hotel. I'm drunk out of my mind. The orange barrels are just a blur on the construction on the side of the road. I don't know how I got there without killing her, myself, another driver. And then I find out she's a prostitute, and then I start yelling at her and everything else, kick her out of my room. And now I go to the minibar, and I'm just drinking Tanqueray and things that I've never even tried before out of the minibar just because it's there. I am on a mission of absolute self-destruction. This is 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. It starts getting light around 7 o'clock, and I had my phone on the charger, and I just started thinking about how much I hated my life. I just cheated on my son's mom. I drunk. I'm putting everything at risk. My thinking at the time was completely delusional. And I went on my balcony in my room, and I've never been suicidal my whole life ever. And I wanted to die. I wanted to die. I hated myself so bad for what I was doing, and that I felt completely out of control. Because I've been out of control, I've got somewhat healthy again, and I let myself get out of control again. And I felt at that time that my life was just useless. I'm doomed. I'm just going to take everybody else down with me. And I remember sitting on the balcony of my 15th floor room, sitting on the edge of this thing like this, trying to just give myself enough courage, right like this. If I just slip, it's over. 2 seconds later, it's done. You know, it'll be all done. I don't have to ever go through this ever again. And my phone was on the charger, and it kept ringing. And all I kept thinking about was my son Giovanni. And I kept thinking maybe something happened to him. And that's what got me off that ledge. And when I got in there, it was my friend Mark Lewis who lived in Miami. That's how I met Javi, because Javi and Mark Lewis were friends in Miami 20-some years ago, and we became friends. And Mark Lewis said, I saw you're on Facebook, you're in Miami, you didn't call me? I'm like, no. He goes, are you drunk? I said, yeah. He goes, I thought you were sober. I said, no, that was a long time ago. He goes, dude, where are you at? He said, I'm at the Fontainebleau. He left work, he came in, he sat with me, and I cried and cried and cried. And he took me to a noon meeting, and I was still drunk at noon when he took me to that AA meeting. And he says, I'm going to be your sponsor. You're going to do 90 meetings in 90 days. I said, I can't. I got to get back. Joe, you have to go to 90 meetings. I have a business. You have to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. I said, I don't have. He goes, you would have jumped off that damn thing, and you would have been dead. You have all the time in the world. 90 meetings in 90 days, and you're going to call me at the beginning and end of every one of these meetings. I said, okay. He goes, you want to live for your son? I said, yeah. He goes, then you're going to do exactly that. And I did. And I started going to meetings, and I reconnected with Noel. Now, Noel was the father to a friend of mine that I went to elementary school with, Chris George. And when I sat at this table in this AA meeting in Royal Oak, it's a first step table, I'm looking at this guy next to me, and he's talking, and I look at the shape of his mouth and his teeth and his voice and everything. I said, man, that guy looks so familiar. And I asked him after the meeting, I said, do you have a son named Chris? He goes, yeah. I said, man, I went to Upland Hill School. He goes, yeah. So we just connected. And he didn't want to sponsor anybody at the time, but he said he would take me under his wing. And during this period of 90-90, he basically sponsored me. And he gave me a lot of advice, a lot of things that I didn't want to do. He said, just do it. And I was coachable enough to the point where I got at least enough out of my own ego way to at least listen to what he said. He says, go to this landmark forum, go to this, study this, read this, say this. And I did it. And my life got better. Now, I stayed at the First Step table for 14 months. And one of the people that went to Landmark, he encouraged a lot of people to take this course called the Landmark Forum. And some of the people that were at that table went, and I got so much out of it that I asked my son's mom to go to it also. Figured maybe we can connect and fix our relationship. And during her share at the Landmark Forum, she shared stuff about our relationship where I was drunk once and I smacked her. I was abusive to her. And I buried that because it was something I did when I was blackout drunk. I'll never do it again. I mean, all these things, I never thought that was me. And I had done that, but I didn't admit it to anybody. I hadn't worked any step besides the first step. I wasn't going to come clean with this. I wanted to suppress it. I wanted to make believe it wasn't there. And I made that the excuse to not go back to that table because there were 3 people at that AA table that heard her say that. And I was so ashamed and so embarrassed, and I was resentful even at Noel for putting those, I completely, crazy to even think that way. But I said, F that, I'm not going back to AA. I just won't drink. And a few months later, what did I do? Picked up another drink. And it was just a few months later, I'm driving like a maniac, again, drunk. This time I'm rich, I have a Lamborghini. And I'm driving 150 miles an hour instead of 90 miles an hour. Drunk, with a passenger in the car, in the rain. With a son at home. With a business, with people that look up to me, that need me. This is how insane I am when this gets in my body. I wound up getting arrested, now facing felony DUI. I was right on the line, so I luckily got out of it by a technicality. I was exactly a .08, and I should have gone to prison. I got lucky. But at that point I knew, and the reason why I knew so much was because this time I'm going to jail, and I'm sitting on my handcuffs on the hard plastic seat, handcuffs too tight, my wrist is feeling like it's breaking. And I look out the window and what do I see? I see a Carpet Guys billboard with a picture of my son on it. And I look out the window and I just kept thinking that, my son was at the age at that point where every time when he would catch a ball, or he would like shoot a little basket, or he would do something, "Look at me, Dad!" That's what he would say. He was so proud, and I was so proud every time he said, "Look at me, Dad." And all I kept thinking in my head was, "Look at me, son." As I'm looking up at this billboard while I'm sitting on my handcuffs going to jail facing a felony DUI, which could have taken me away for 2 years. I got back into AA, and it was about 1 year into AA. This is when I met Randy. I asked Randy to be my sponsor. Randy came with some hardcore tactics that really kicked my ass, and I needed that. I wasn't ready to go back to the meetings where Noel was. I wasn't ready to face the fact that I relapsed. I was still very ashamed of it. It was 1 year, almost 1 year into my sobriety this time around. I'm now almost 6 years coming up to. And I wanted to go to Hawaii because during my 90-90 I met Hetty. During my first 90 days sober this time around, we went to Hawaii and I went to AA meetings there, and that's where I met Hetty. And I wanted Hetty to meet Randy, and I wanted to celebrate my 1 year sober there. He goes, "I won't go with you." I brought Randy and Tim on that trip. He said, "I won't go with you unless you do your 4th step. You've got to do your 4th step." I said, "We'll do it I made every excuse in the world not to do this thing. I mean, I started looking at some of the questions, and I was like, "No way," And he forced me. He forced me to do it. And I'll tell you, if he wouldn't have forced me to do that, I'd probably be drunk or dead right now. Because that forced me to own it all. It forced me to be honest. And I remember doing my 5th step with Randy, Tim, and Scott in Hawaii. And I remember I wrote 150 some pages. I mean, this was 7 or 8 hours we sat outside in the sun as I'm reading this thing. And I remember halfway through this thing, as I'm reading my 4th step inventory, there was a paragraph coming up that I was so ashamed to share that even with these guys, I wasn't going to share it. So I skipped right over it. And I kept reading. A couple pages later, there was something else that I read that I was really ashamed of, that I felt that they were judging me on. So I stopped what I was saying. I started making a story about it. I started telling an excuse as to why I did what I did. And I kept on reading. And about 2 minutes later, I stopped and I said, "Guys, I lied to you." I said, if I continue reading, I'm going to do the same thing that I did every single time before. I'm going to still live in this dishonest life. I'm going to still do this whole thing wrong. And I'm going to drink again. And if I drink again, I'm going to die. And my kid's going to grow up without a dad. That's how serious this was for me at that point. So I said, I'm going to go back 5 pages. I'm going to read this again. And I'm going to read it word for word. And I was so ashamed reading some of this stuff from my childhood, stuff from my adulthood, things that I had done, that just feelings things that just, I would take it to the grave stuff. And I remember looking down, I was on this patio in this guy's backyard when we were doing this, and all I could see was my feet and a puddle of tears about that big on this hot concrete. That's how many tears were. It wasn't even evaporating because there were so many. I was just bawling my eyes out as I was reading this stuff, sobbing. And I couldn't look up at these guys when I had finished. And what changed my life forever, I think, for that point, at least to that point, I heard a voice over to my right say, "It's okay, me too." And then he said, "That's crazy, but I did that." He started telling a story about his life, something when he was young. And then Scott, which is a guy that I barely knew, I just took a risk with, that had 40 years, started sharing. At that moment was the first time in my life that I felt okay in my own skin, because I hated myself. I didn't even know I hated myself. I was so checked out and covered up and medicated to not know. I was so out of touch. And that's when I really started to own it. And once I was able to find forgiveness for me, because other people accepted me, and now I was able to forgive me, it changed the whole dynamic of how I interact with other people. When we read acceptance, those words in there, I got that now. I didn't get that before. Because how dare you do this? Oh, you do this in your life. You're a rotten person. How could you think that way? Jenny, thank you so much for having the conversation with Noel that started with, "Noel, I don't like it when you drink." Because if you wouldn't have had that conversation with him, I never would have got the nuggets that I got from him that were the foundation of my recovery today. that conversation, that transformational conversation you had with your husband all those years ago, changed my life too. And a lot of other people that come and hear from him every day when he shares. Thank you. It's neat, when they say nothing in God's world happens by mistake. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens in God's world by mistake. I had to be that asshole as a teenager. I had to be that rebellious person that's stuck with the vacuum company. I had to be that person that, I had to fail over and over and over again. I hope to God I don't fail at this again. I love my son. My parents both have dementia. If I would have gone to jail 2 years ago, they'd be stuck in a nursing home right now. Who knows who would be caring for them. I've got a lot of work I need to do. There's a lot of things that I need to still learn. A lot of things that I really areas of growth. I put all these notes down because I when Randy shares things with me or he gives me advice, I listen. When Noel talks, I listen. I don't look at my phone. I'm not looking at my shoes. I'm not looking up at the ceiling tiles. I look in his eyes and I listen because I know that if I want what they got, I got to do what they do. When Hetty talks about living a life of titanium honesty, that's a role model for me right there because I've been dishonest my whole life, and I know that if I hang around people that are dishonest, that will justify doing certain behaviors, I'm going to be the average of those people. So today, I might choose to hang around 1 or 2 people that I can maybe pull up a little bit, but 9 out of every 10 people are people that are playing the game at a much higher level than me because I want to be more like them. I want to get the recovery that they've got. And I've experienced moments, once in a great while, of that joy that people talk about when they say, happy, joyous, and free. Hee, that's what Scott's there now, but that's definitely, no, he's not. But I've experienced glimpses of that, just briefly. And I'll say a couple weeks ago, I really experienced it for a good solid hour. I was waking up, and I was waking up late. We go to Kensington Church in Troy, and they also do it on Zoom. And I sat with my girlfriend and my son, both in my arms, as we just watched church for an hour. And that whole day, I just felt present. I felt connected. I felt loved. I felt loved. I felt God. When I pray today, I don't pray for outcomes. I know that my parents are. My dad was in the ER twice last week. And his body's trying to die. He's 91. He's got congestive heart failure. He's got dementia. He's got all kinds of things. If you take this medication away, it's going to blow this up. If you add to this medication, you're going to blow this up. What I pray for is I pray for his comfort. I pray for my mom's comfort. I pray for my sister's well-being. I pray for, that's what I pray. I pray that everything, it's thy will, not my will. And that's what I pray for. Because my will gets me in trouble. My will is destructive. My will thinks it knows it all. My will is arrogant and cocky. And it's hard because I'm in a position where in running a business where I have to have some A-type personality traits, but I also have to surrender. And that's hard. And I remember when I was celebrating that 1 year in Maui, Randy said, for the next 30 days, I want you to introduce yourself instead of saying, hey, I'm Joe, I'm an alcoholic. I want you to say, I'm Joe, I'm utterly defeated, I'm a complete wreck alcoholic. And I said, that's going to sound so weird. That's going to be weird. I can't say that. That's going to be goofy. Everyone's going to look at me funny. He said, you're going to drink again. He said, you're going to drink again. Your choice, whatever you want to do. But you're going to drink again, Joe. What consequences is that going to bring if you drink again? And so for the next 30 days, I went to meetings and I said, I'm Joe, I'm a complete wreck, out of control, I'm a complete wreck, And I remember saying this stuff over and over again, and after about 4 or 5 days, because what happens to me is my ego takes control. I think I'm fixed. The difference between Tim and I during that, when I caught this, and I remember he was getting his 20-year token, and I said, I'm never going to let that guy get more than 20 years on me. At that point, I was 2 weeks in. So as long as he's out there staying sober, I gotta stay sober. He's not getting 20 years on me. But the difference was when he got in, he stayed in. Now I also know some character defects that I have is I look at people that are my sponsors. what happened with Noel with the landmark form thing, I got resentful, I got angry, I started blaming him. When Randy would get hard on me and talk to me about things, that I didn't want to hear, I would say, Randy's pulling all that religious shit on me again. And that's where I would go in my head. Because I didn't want to hear it. But I also know that's my disease. That's my disease convincing me that I don't have this disease. That's my disease telling me that I know better. That's my disease that's fooling me, that it's fooled me over and over and over again, that always wound up getting me close to killed or in jail. That's my disease that will take everything away from me, that'll take my son's dad away from him. This disease is deadly. It's worse than a tornado that devastates subdivisions because it impacts so many people. And so I'm so grateful today because AA has not only saved my life, it allowed me to show up to be a really great dad to my kid. It allowed me to forgive and be forgiven. It allows me to have a great relationship with my son's mom again, even though despite all the turbulence. It allows me to show up pretty well for my girlfriend. Not always, sometimes I'm an ass. But what this program has also done is it taught me to be accountable. When I'm an ass, I admit that I'm an ass. I say that I'm sorry for being an ass. And I don't want to have to say sorry again. These steps keep me accountable. These steps and you people keep me accountable. And because even when I don't want to come here, I come here because I said it in the meeting the other day, I just kind of stumbled across it. He said I was brilliant. I felt good about when he said that. When your car's out of alignment, it's the first thing I'm going to say it twice now. When your car's out of alignment, it keeps wanting to verge off to the right, and unless you put the wheel back over here, my alignment's screwed up. That's just the way it is. This is the way I'm wired. I can't make believe that I'm wired any differently. I'm a screw up. I'm rebellious. I think I know it all. I'm egotistical. I'm a liar. I'm a thief. I'm a cheater. I'm all these things. By default. By circumstances that molded me into that personality trait. I need to come here and get help. I need to come here and get my medicine. Before I bought this building that we're in, I bought this from Brian Elias, who owned Hanson's. When he sold Hanson's, he sold me the building. And when I bought this building, I was talking with Hetty when we were in Hawaii, and I said, I really want to get this building and I need to dedicate a space for AA. And the reason why I did that was not to make money, because I can lease this 2,500 square foot area for 10 times what it brings for rent. I wanted it for a even more selfish reason. I wanted it for my kid, because I want my kid to have a dad. And I travel a lot, and I'm busy a lot, and I always have excuses not to go to a meeting today. I'll go tomorrow. Well, if it's right down the hall for me, I don't have an excuse. If I'm in Japan and the closest meeting's 40 miles away, and I don't know how to work the subway system in Tokyo, guess what? 12steproom.org, and guess what? I'm back here with my home group. If I can't make it to my home group, guess what? I can also go there and go to a 24/7 meeting. I can always find a meeting. And that's what I needed. I needed that for my recovery. I needed that for my son. All the things for my parents, for everybody that means something to me, I needed that. So that's why I wanted to create this. And Hetty and I talked about this for a long time. And Hetty and Tammy and Nolan, you guys, so many of you guys. Michael, he's here. Michael was one of the people from the very beginning. He used to come every single day. And if we, Bob, thank you. All you guys. This is why this is here. It's for places for people like me or people like you that we can get better. And I'm just really, really grateful for all of you, because you help me every single day get better. I've got a long way to go. I'm still a wreck. I'm totally defeated. I'm a complete disaster. But I'm getting better. I'm getting better because of the help from you people. So I'm very, very grateful. Thank you. I'm Joe. I'm an alcoholic.